Hello, everyone. I'm so excited because today I'm talking to my close friend, Ashlee Lundvall. She's a speaker and an author, as well as an advocate for accessible outdoor recreation and accessibility in general. I wanted to invite Ashlee onto my vlog for a conversation about accessibility. Recently, I was out and about in Duluth, Minnesota, and spotted these disabled parking signs. Instead of listing a fine, they just say, be considerate. This really angered me as these parking spots are not being legally enforced. These parking spots are absolutely required for people with disabilities, especially physical disabilities, and those who use wheelchairs like myself and Ashlee, especially when it comes to the painted hash marks next to the spaces so we can get in and out of our cars and vans. So I brought this up to Ashlee in a private conversation, and she had a lot to say. So welcome to my vlog, Ashlee. I'm so glad that you're here. So tell me a little about
Thank you for having me.
yeah. Tell me a little bit about yourself and your work.
Well, I live in Cody, Wyoming with my husband and 11-year-old daughter. So I am surrounded 360 degrees by mountains, which a lot of people just assume would be completely inaccessible. But it's been a good challenge for me to learn how to get out and live my life and not let things slow me down. But at the same time, learn to advocate for myself and others living in a small town that's very outdoorsy and not necessarily accessible. And so it's been a really good challenge for me to love living where I live, but still understand exactly what I need to do to be independent and get outdoors and do what I love to do. So it's a good challenge for me.
Awesome. So what are your thoughts on the disabled parking signs that I saw in Minnesota?
Oh goodness. I thought, well, isn't that just adorable? It's it blows my mind that people, what are we now, 2021, and this is still not taken seriously. I mean, if you think about all of the divisive things that are brought up these days that make us all different and separate, and unfortunately how it's caused so many problems across the country today, whether people are talking about race or ethnicity or sexuality or whatever it is that people that make them different, no one ever wants to talk about disabilities as a serious topic. Can you imagine if you had pulled into a parking space and it said, purple people only can park here, or it had said, people that only do one thing or the other can park here? I mean, people would just have an absolute fit, and they should, because that's discrimination. But for whatever reason, here we are all these years later, and people do not take discrimination against people with disabilities seriously. And they think it's okay to make, cute comments like, just please be kind and considerate. And I don't think if you had told people during everything going on with the Civil Rights Act in the 60s, like, as long as we're just kind and considerate, everything should be fine, that people would have bought that. And yet it's still accepted as somehow that you can, treat people with disabilities and it's okay. And so I was angry and unfortunately not surprised, but determined, and kind of just wanted to get the message out even more that this is still happening every day across the country to people with disabilities. And it's time that it needs to stop and it needs to be taken seriously.
Yes, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I completely agree. And I'm so glad that we're talking about this because I really hope that it sparks more conversation, that it sparks even a movement that we can realize that being considerate is not it's not enough, that these need to be legally enforced. And for those of you who are watching today, maybe you're not aware that normally these disabled parking spots have a fine of at least $250, maybe $100. And usually that's been enforced by the law. So it's really frustrating to see that being removed and see that we're just expecting people to be considerate. And both Ashlee and I know from our many years of sitting in these wheelchairs, that people are not considerate, that they think, well, it's just a spot and there's other ones. So I'll just use my tag that, I got when I got my hip replaced or my knee replaced or my mom's or my grandma's.
Stole from my grandma. Yeah.
Yeah, it can't be that harmful, right? I'm just going in for 5 minutes. The people don't realize that when that happens, we can't use those spots. And we need those spots. That's what those spots have been put there for. And so it's really important for people to realize that when they decide to use these disabled parking spots, even though they have the tab and they're not disabled, that it's wrong and that it really infringes on those of us that have disabilities from access to getting out of our vehicles to doing things that we need to do to be independent in our lives. So thank you so much for answering that question. Next, how do you think this points to the larger issue about accessibility and equal rights for people with disabilities?
I think it's a huge red flag that this is just a little piece of a much larger problem. If you think about parking in general, that's an issue, but we still have buildings that we can't access. And, a lot of times they'll say, well, we're grandfathered in. And I'm like, okay, again, go back to the example. How would it feel to other people today if there was a sign on the door that said, everyone of every color is invited to come into our building, but if you're purple, you can't come in? People would have an absolute fit about that. There would be lawsuits. There would be people charging Capitol Hill. There would be riots in the street, as we've seen for other acts of discrimination, which are not right. But someone with a disability cannot be granted access to a building that has stairs because it costs too much money for that to be ramped. And I'm like, again, if you took that same reasoning and applied it to any other, group of people that are discriminated against because of their differences, that would be, people would be outraged. We need people to get outraged about discrimination that is going on every day across this entire country for people with disabilities. And the sad thing is we've been living with it probably longer than a lot of people have. And again, it's just kind of expected that we're just supposed to either not go into that building, or I've even had people say, well, why don't you just drive up and I'll run in and take care of it for you? And again, that's a band-aid to a much larger problem. Just because it's a cheaper fix for other people doesn't mean that it's right. Just because it's easier to not fine people for parking and just ask them to maybe be considerate, and that's, somehow considered a nicer way to approach people, that doesn't make it okay. That would never fly with any other group of people that are discriminated against. And yet, unfortunately, it's still just accepted for whatever reason within people that have disabilities and in that community. And so I think it's definitely a picture of a much larger issue here. And there's definitely things that can be done. But at the same time, I think the first step is awareness, which is why I'm so glad that we're talking about it today.
Exactly. I think and hope that this is going to be eye-opening for a lot of people, because even when I reached out to you, I was like, I'm really upset about this. Is that okay? Like, am I the only one that's ever seen these signs? Like, I really was feeling a little bit of confusion too. Like, how should I feel about this? And when I talked to you, I was like, yes, I am. It is okay to be angered about this and to be frustrated about this. And this is how all the other people um have gained rights, is by speaking up and advocating for themselves. So I'm really hoping for those who are watching today with disabilities that you'll stand with us and help us to start making a difference with this and to speak up, which really brings me to my next question. Do you think people with disabilities are responsible for speaking up and being advocates when we see accessibility problems? Why or why not?
I absolutely think that people with disabilities are responsible for it, because if we don't, who's going to?
Yep.
I mean, I think back to, I've been in a wheelchair a little over 22 years now. And I remember when I was able-bodied, and I was driving, I would pull into like the Walmart parking lot and I would think like, there aren't this many disabled people in the world. Why are all these parking spots here? Like, I can never find a parking spot because all these people with disabilities have to have a parking spot. And then in a blink of an eye, suddenly I'm a person with a disability and now I can't find a parking spot to save my life. And so my perspective changed. But at the same time, I can't expect other people to advocate for me if I'm not willing to advocate for myself.
Yep.
And while it's certainly going to take all of us, those with disabilities and those that are able-bodied, working together, We can't just sit back and expect someone else to do this for us. We are the people that are dealing with it every day. It's affecting us personally. And that passion that comes behind fighting for something that you believe in so personally is not going to happen to just anybody else on the street that hasn't dealt with it. And case in point, I have friends that were never really around people with disabilities until they met me. And suddenly they're more aware of parking spaces and buildings that are not accessible in their own homes, even. I have friends that will apologize to me all the time. I'm so sorry. We didn't even think when we bought a house to make sure it was accessible. And it's that awareness that they never had before had they not met someone with a disability. And so if we were to just sit around and wait for other people to do it, it's not going to happen. It will never happen. And until there's consequences to the discrimination, there's never going to be any change. That's how other minority groups have gotten change, real change happening. And I know several of them obviously are still battling that. But sometimes, that saying, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, is true for a reason. I'm not saying that we need to go to the extremes that some maybe have, but sitting by and waiting for someone else to come along and fix it for us is not going to work. And so we've got to be vocal, but we've also got to hit people where it hurts. And that's finances, unfortunately, which is when we go back to the parking. If you're not fining people and just asking them to be considerate, people are like, I ain't got time to be considerate. I'm going to park here because I got to go do my thing. But if you say, well, guess what? If you park here, it's going to cost you $1,000. That's going to get people's attention a little bit more than the fact that someone said they weren't considerate. So I think if we want to make this serious and we want other people to take it seriously, you've got to hit people where it hurts. And again, that's in their wallets.
Yes, wow, that's so true. And hopefully we can see that happen. And I do, even myself, so many people have said, I've never thought about accessibility. I never thought about you can't get into these places. And it's like, yeah. And sadly, I have been one that has said, well, they're grandfathered in or it's too hard, but Ashley's firing me up and getting me passionate about this. So I'm so thankful for your perspective.